Hey friends, I'm Sakay, and today we're going to start building the little app that we designed in the last video using the awesome kernel plugin in Figma. The app is going to be using data from the same API that we're using in Figma, and today we're just going to set up our file and our config and start building this card component with Tailwind CSS. As I mentioned in my last video, this is part of a 4-part series, so if you do like today's video and you want to continue building this app with me, subscribe to see the rest. And of course, if you haven't already, check out the previous video to set up this file here. Again, using the kernel plugin to pull in data from this Animal Crossing API that we're going to actually use in our app. So with that said, let's just get into it. So first I wanted to touch on a couple of things that I did to set up this file in Figma to help us move over to code a little bit easier. So within the Figma community, if you look up Tailwind, and I'll put a link to this in the description, but if you go to files and templates, there are a couple of them. I use the official file created by Tailwind Labs. It's not the most up-to-date file, but I trust this more than other files in the community because it comes straight from them, and it's good enough to get us where we want to today. So I copied that file and I created a different copy in here, and you can see that one of the things I did was to change our font. So the font that we're using in this project, because it's kind of like a fun, playful Animal Crossing design, is this rounded font. So I went in and updated all my styles to have this rounded font, and we're going to do that obviously in Tailwind. So you can see that all of the font styles that come with this file are now using this rounded font. I've also added some extra things where I needed them. So there's this text chunk style, which doesn't come with Tailwind by default, but I've added it to my library. And then within the file itself, I created some color styles. This is pretty standard Figma stuff, but you can obviously create color styles. So I have this primary color, which I use actually pretty rarely. And then I have a couple of neutrals, 4 neutrals to be exact, 100, 200, 800, and 900. And we're just going to take those, pull them into Tailwind, and we're going to be able to use them really easily in our designs. But first, before we can do that, we want to import Tailwind from their Play CDN. So I'm going to go over here to Arc, and then I'm going to go to TailwindCSS.com. And if we head over to their docs and to get started, you'll see that there's a couple of ways to get started here and install the framework. The best way to do this is the Tailwind CLI. For today, we're going to use the Play CDN because it's the easiest way to get started. You just add a link to your document and you can start using Tailwind. But of course, this is not ideal in production. Tailwind CSS comes with a lot of classes. And so if you're not getting rid of those classes using post CSS to purge them, you're going to end up with a massive CSS file for no real reason. But again, for today, we're going to use this. It's going to help us get started really quickly and just get a sense of how Tailwind works. So as it says here, we're just going to copy this script tag and we're going to head over to our file in VS Code. You can see I have an index.html file, and I'm just going to hit exclamation mark and hit enter. And that's going to set us up with just the basic website boilerplate, basic HTML boilerplate. And then here I'm just going to change the title to ACNH database. And just below that, I'm going to paste our script from the Tailwind CDN. And now just to test things out, I'm going to add a BGBlue 200 class to the body just to test out if Tailwind is working correctly. I'm going to hit go live down here. If you don't have this, you can just go into the extensions in VS Code, look up live server, and install this extension. And what that does is it lets me hit this button and the website will go live. And you can see here that the body has a background of BGBlue 200. If I change this to red 200, this is going to update and change to red. So looks good. We have Tailwind working in our file. Let's remove this class. Of course, we don't need it here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import a font from Google Fonts. So the font I'm using is Nunito. And so I'm just going to copy this script. You can just get these on Google Fonts, or you can use a different font. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. And then finally, I'm going to create a new file. So in here, I'm going to create a file called tailwindconfig.js. And you can see in the documentation for Tailwind, It shows us how we can customize our config with this tailwind.config. And we're just going to do that in a separate file to make our lives easier and to keep our HTML file clean. What's the point of a config? Well, as I showed earlier, we have some custom stuff going on, right? We have a custom font, we have some custom colors, and actually we have some custom border radiuses. These cards have a really, really high border radius that doesn't exist in Tailwind. We also have some animation curves, and overall, we just have some custom stuff that we want to add onto Tailwind. So as we saw in the documentation, we just need to write tailwind.config, and that's going to be an object. And then in here, we're going to need to write theme, and then extend, because we want to add our own custom styles on top of the existing theme. And the first thing I'm going to add is border radius. And Tailwind has a couple of border radiuses. If we go to their documentation and we look up radius, you can see that it goes up to, it goes up to 3XL, which is 24 pixels. If you check out our file, ours is 48 pixels, so we're gonna need a little bit more than that. And actually this image has 64 pixels, so we're gonna need even more than that. So following the same kind of naming convention, we're gonna add a 6XL, and that's gonna be 3 rem, which we can check. So 3 times 16 is 48. So 3 rem is 48 pixels by default. Then we're going to add our 8XL, which is going to be that 64 pixels. And so 64 divided by 16 is 4. So 8XL is going to be 4 rem. And now we can use these classes within our Tailwind file to actually apply these border radiuses. The next thing we're going to add is our colors. So we have, as mentioned, custom colors here available to us. So let's do that. I'm going to add colors, and this is also an object. And then we'll add primary, which is going to equal this. So let's inspect and take a look at this color, and we can just copy the hex code here. And then we're also going to add a whole neutral palette. So this is going to be an object, and then in it we'll have 100, which is this color. Make sure to put it in quotation marks. 200, which is this right here. So now we have an extended palette of colors. We now have access to primary and neutral, 100, 200, 800, and 900. And the beauty of Tailwind is that it's actually going to generate a bunch of classes for us. So as you saw earlier, I added a class to my body to test it out. It was BG Blue 200 or BG Red 200. And now we have access to all of these new classes for our custom colors. So I could go into my body as an example and make it BG Primary. And if we hit save and take a look at our preview, it's not going to work because I haven't imported my Tailwind config file. So let's go back into our index.html. And just below the script to import Tailwind CSS, I'm going to add a new script source. And the source is just going to be tailwindconfig.js. So now if we go back, we can see in our preview that we do have those custom colors. We do have a BG of primary. I can also do BG neutral 800, and it'll change that color. And just as a test, you can also see that we have, if we do text primary, it's going to set our text color to this hideous primary. Don't do this, it looks terrible. But again, just to test it out and see that Tailwind is generating all of these custom classes for us that we now have access to in our file. Okay, so let's remove all of that and continue. So we'll also need to add the font family. We are using this custom font. So we're gonna type in font family, open a new object, and this is gonna be called rounded. So we're gonna generate a new class called font rounded. And in here, we're going to pass this array. And first, we're going to try and use UI rounded. So this is SF Pro rounded, which comes by default on your Mac. If that's not on there, if you're not using a Mac, then our backup font is going to be Nunito, which we pulled in from Google Fonts. And then as a final backup, we'll do Apple System and Blink Mac System font. These are just kind of like standard fallback fonts from your system. One more thing we need to add for our fonts. If we go back to this TailwindCSS file, you'll see that we have our custom text chonk font. And that's the one that I use here in this slide over. There's this big Japanese text at the bottom that's using text chonk. So in our Tailwind config, underneath font family, I'm going to add a new font size. I'm going to extend our font size, and that's going to be called chonk. And we're going to pass an array with a bunch of properties, which is a font size of 12.5 rem. We can see that in here. That's 200 pixels. So let's go here, and we're going to add this object that includes our line height of, as I mentioned, 14.25 rem. And then the last thing we need here is this letter spacing, which is negative 20 pixels. 20 divided by 16 is 1.25. So we're going to do letter spacing is equal to minus 1.25 rem. And finally, there's just one more thing I need to add. So our image here in our component is width of 88 and a height of 88 pixels. Tailwind doesn't have this specific height by default. They have something close to it on either end, but I want to have our own custom height. So I'm just going to go back here into the config, and right after font size, I'm going to add a custom height of, and we're going to call it 22, and it's going to be 5.5 rem. And then we're going to do the same for width. So we can make this a perfect square. It's going to be 22 and 5.5 rem. So now we have access to all the classes that we need in order to start building our card component. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a class to the body. I'm going to keep it minimal. You don't really want to style your body, but we're just going to apply a BG neutral 200, and we're going to do font rounded. And that's just going to make all of our text have this rounded font that we imported by default. So now if we go back and forth between Figma, we can actually start building this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put it in a grid. We can see here that we have a grid with 3 columns and then a bunch of rows just that keep filling up based on how many cards we have. And the way that we do this is within our body, I'm just going to create a new div. And this div is going to have a class of margin auto, MX auto, because we want to have it centered. It's going to have padding X of 8 and padding Y of 8 as well, and width full so that it stretches out. Then we're going to give it a max width. So max width 6XL. That's going to give it a max width of what we have here, which is 1152, as you can see here in the documentation. Then finally, we're going to turn this into a grid. And this is going to have grid calls 3 to give it 3 columns. And then we can see in Figma that the columns have a gap of 20 pixels. So we'll make this gap 5. So in here, we'll start building our card. And of course, our card is going to be a div. And this div is going to have a class of relative, flex, and justify center. Within that, we're going to have our image. We can see that there's actually a div with another div inside it. And so we're going to add, of course, a div where we're going to use that custom class that we just created. So H22 and W22 to give it a height of 88 pixels and a width of 88 pixels. We want our overflow to be hidden so that the image inside this doesn't overflow. And then rounded full, which is going to make it a circle. We're going to give it a BG neutral 200. And then we're going to give it flex with items center and justify center to just make sure that our image that we're going to put in here is nicely centered. Within this div, we're going to add our image. This is going to be an image. Our source is going to be a link. I'm just going to, for now, copy this manually. This is just the link of this icon. So this comes again from our API. If I open Insomnia, this is again the API that we used last time to build our designs. We can see that each villager has this icon URI. So literally we can just copy this first one here, and that's what we pasted in here. Let's remove the source set, and then we'll just do villager icon image. Not a great alt text, but it's okay for now. Then we want to apply a class. And so we want to give this image a certain height and width, h of 5/6 and w of 5/6. So we're just saying be 5/6 of the parent div. And we're just going to use the object cover property to make sure that this image covers the div really nicely and doesn't stretch in weird ways. Okay, so let's have a look at what this is looking like in our preview here. And I'm seeing now that this is actually, we missed some styles here. So let's quickly go back to our code here. We want to wrap all of this in another div. This is going to be our card. So div, we'll grab all of this code and move it up into this other div. And then we're going to style this to look like this. We can see that our auto layout has padding of 24 pixels on all sides. So let's go and create a class, and we're going to do P6. So padding of 4x6 on all sides. We're going to use our rounded 6XL class, our custom class that we pulled in. We're going to have border 4 to give it this nice thick border that we see here. And then border white, and we can start seeing here that it's starting to build our card really nicely. Then we're going to give it BG neutral 100, again using those custom colors. And then we want to give this card flex. So this is going to, again, emulate kind of auto layout here. So flex, we can see it has a gap of 20, so that's 5. So gap 5. And then we want our items to be centered, and we want it to have a shadow of, shadow XL. And then it's a little bit hard to see here. Let's actually make this background color. But as we go from our base state to our hover state, the shadow kind of grows. So what we're going to do is on hover, we want our shadow to be 2XL instead of XL. And because this is going to be clickable, we want cursor pointer so that we get the nice little hand as we hover over it. And then if we go into Figma and take a look at our interactive component, we can see that as we hover, we want this to smart animate and ease out over 200 milliseconds. So we're going to say transition shadow so that we can have a smooth transition on the shadow property. We're going to make our duration 200 milliseconds, and it's ease out. So we're just going to apply ease out to make that smooth transition. If we go back, we say we have our nice card. It's got this nice transition, and it's looking a lot like what we have in Figma. Next thing we want to do is add this little chip for the villager's birthday. So first things to do that, I'm going to export this icon. And what I can do is just export as SVG straight out of Figma. And I'm going to create a new folder called icons. And then in here, we're going to save our cake.svg. Now, if we go back into our code, just underneath our image within the same div, we're going to add a new div. This is going to be our little chip. And then within it, we're going to have an image. And the source is going to be our icons/cake.svg. And the alt, we'll just make it birthday icon. And then within here, we're also going to have a little span. And this span is going to say 9.3. Again, we're just using static data for now. So we used this image here, and we're just using 9/3. This is just like a random date. In the next video, we're going to actually pull in real dynamic data from the API. So now we just want to style this div. So we're going to give it flex. And in Tailwind, that's a gap of 0.5, py of 1, and px 1.5. Looking quite janky. So we can see here we have text extra small, leading 4, and font normal. So in our code, we'll write the same thing. So text XS, extra small, leading 4, font normal. The color is going to be text neutral 800. And then we want to make this pill be absolute. So we'll do bottom 0, and we'll do negative margin bottom 3. And if we go in here, we see that we have our Tate right where we would expect it to be. So now let's give this a background of neutral 100 for the little pill. We want to give it a border, and the border should have a color of neutral 200. We're going to make it rounded full to give it that circular rounding. And then we're going to give it shadow SM, small shadow, again, to match what we have here in our designs. And if we go back here, let me just zoom in, we can see that it looks good. There is a bit of an issue here, and I think I messed up. Yeah, so instead of background neutral 100, it should be BG neutral 100. There we go. Now it's looking closer to our designs. In fact, it's looking very, very close to our designs. All right, so let's go ahead and add in all of the text here on the right. So still within this card here, we're going to add a new div. So we'll do a class of flex. And again, it's a column, so flex column, a gap of 2, and items start. And then here, we're going to create that name chip. So it's a div with a class of text 2XL. That's the same, but then we want to make it leading none. Font semi-bold. So font semi-bold. Then again, to give it that pill shape, we're going to make it a rounded full, PX3, PB1 for padding bottom, and PT for padding top of 0.5. In the next video where we pull in data from the API, we're going to use these properties here. And so to do that really easily, we're going to do it in the style tag. So I'm going to give it a background color, and let's just pull in this bubble color here, and then we'll give it color for the text color, and we'll pull in this right here. Of course, this looks a little silly right now, so let's add some text to it. And so we'll do first a span that says Cyrano, and then a span with, if we hit Command Control Space, we can search male, and it should have the little symbol for male. We now have this pill, as we see in our designs. So the next thing we need is their species and personality type. So that's going to be a new div. Just below that, we'll add a new div, and in it, we're going to add some spans. So this first span is going to be jock. Again, this is going to be replaced by dynamic data. Our second span is going to be this separator dot, and then another span, and this is going to say bird. Now let's style this. So text-based, leading 6, and font medium. Leading 6, font medium. And then our text color is neutral 900. So text neutral 900. And just to match what we have in Figma, let's also give it flex with a gap of 2. As you see in Figma here, it's got auto layout with a gap of 8 pixels, which is 2 in Tailwind land. Perfect. Let's go ahead and export this icon. So with the icon selected, I'll go to export SVG, and we'll export it to that same icons folder. And then we'll add another div down here. This is going to be where our quote lives. And so we'll do div. We'll add within it our image. And this is going to be the icon. So icon / chat circle SVG. And we'll just do catchphrase icon as our alt text icon. And then we have our span, and his is just chew. Yes. So text, extra small, leading for font normal. And then so we'll do flex and gap is 0.5. And our text is a color of neutral 800. So text neutral 800. Perfect. And now take my card, which is this right here, and I paste it a couple of times. We can see that it's filling our grid. Let's add another one just for good measure. And we can see that it goes onto a new line. So our grid is set up correctly, our cards are styled correctly, and we're now ready to fill them with real data using AlpineJS and the Animal Crossing API. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to get the file here, all of this code will be available on my Patreon, which as always is linked down below. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. And until next time, happy designing.